Hello, my name is Matthew Hunter with Legacy Wilderness Academy, and I'm on a mission to document every edible and medicinal plant in the southeastern U.S. so Southerners can have greater access to nutritious food and free medicine. In today's video, we're going to be looking at a powerful infection-fighting lichen that is wonderful for upper respiratory tract infections like cold and flu, bronchitis, pneumonia, and many other infections in the human body. It's called the old man's beard, or Usnea. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to identify Usnea and separate it from similar looking lichens. We'll talk about its medicinal uses, then we'll take some home and I'll show you how to prepare it into a potent herbal medicine. Stay tuned. Before we begin, I'll quickly mention that if you want to learn more about medicinal plants of the southeastern U.S., make sure that after this video you download my free guide to medicinal plants, which you can find in the link in the description below this video. So here we have some Usnea growing on a live bald cypress limb, along with a number of other lichen species. It can grow on live or dead trees. I would say it's usually found on dead branches in my experience, and lichens are an interesting organism. They are a symbiotic relationship between a fungi and an algae, and so they're very distinct and easy to identify. The way you separate Usnea from other similar looking lichens is by the central elastic cords running throughout it. So if you look closely, you can find one of these cords, and if it's rained recently and it's moist, you can scrape away some of the outer part and see that it's elastic. So it's got some give to it, as you can see here. When it's dry, it won't be as elastic, but you can still sort of scratch out that outer part away, and the core can be either white, pinkish, or sometimes sort of orangish. But regardless of the color, it's one of the main characteristics that separates Usnea from other lichens. Another characteristic to be on the lookout for are these disc-like reproductive structures that you can find on Usnea. So other lichens are going to have these as well. It's not a separating feature, but it does throw off some people if they've never seen it before. So if you see these, it's a totally normal part of Usnea. So here we have one of Usnea's lookalikes on the right side of the screen, and as you can see, it does not have that distinct central cord. So compare that to the Usnea growing right next to it on the left, and you can see the difference is clear. So similar looking lichens like this will often be growing right next to Usnea, even on the same branch, so be on the lookout for them. Another one I see people get confused with is the Spanish moss, which was actually named after Usnea. Spanish moss is a flowering plant known scientifically as Tillandsia usneoides, and that species name literally means resembling Usnea, but the two are not related. So Spanish moss is not a lichen, and you may be familiar with Spanish moss because it's often seen in like pictures of the South where it's drooping off of like live oaks or something, but that is a different plant, not what we're talking about in this video. So it's important to remember that there isn't just one species of Usnea. Various species of Usnea grow all throughout the United States and Europe, and they can all be used similarly. So the one we've been looking at here, I believe, is the bushy beard lichen, or Usnea strigosa. And we actually have another one locally here in northern Louisiana that's much more reminiscent of the ones that I've seen out west. They're a lot longer, and the central cord may be like a little bit thinner. And I'm not 100% sure on this one, but I'm suspicious that it's Usnea trichodia, or the bony beard lichen. But regardless, it doesn't really matter which species of Usnea you have, as long as it has that central cord and you know it's an Usnea. They can all be used similarly. Next, we'll look at where Usnea grows. So like I said, it's not just a southern species. Various species of Usnea can be found widespread throughout the eastern U.S., as well as throughout the Rocky Mountains and throughout much of the western U.S. From there, Usnea can be found north into southern Canada, and it's widespread throughout parts of western Canada, and it goes north throughout western Canada up into southern Alaska. So it's a very widespread species. It can also be found on other continents as well, particularly in Western Europe, where it's very common and widespread. Next, the part you've all been waiting for, let's talk about the medicinal uses of Usnea. So Usnea is a broad spectrum anti-infective herb with immune stimulating and immune modulating properties. It's used primarily for three areas of the body, usually. Those are the lungs, the urinary tract, and the skin, fighting infections in those areas. So let's start by talking about the lungs. So Usnea is a classic antimicrobial for the upper respiratory tract. whether it be bacterial infections or viral infections. Anytime there's cold and flu, bronchitis, pneumonia, or any type of upper respiratory bug, Usnea is going to be one of the go-to herbs, especially when it's mixed with other upper respiratory antivirals, immune system stimulants, and lymph-moving plants. It's one of really the go-to classics that every herbalist should have on hand when dealing with these types of illnesses. Next, Usnea is really famous for its antibacterial properties. So it's been used a lot for treating urinary tract infections for this reason, and it's also used for any type of strep or staph infection. So it's very effective against those types of bacteria. And because of that, Usnea is one of the go-to plants for wound management. If there is an infected wound, like a staph infection, a really nasty infected wound, Usnea is one of those plants that can really help to kill that infection off. And also strep throat would be one that you can use its antibacterial effects very effectively against. However, keep in mind, I don't necessarily recommend that the average person tries to treat strep throat from home, because it's a very serious illness that can really come back and bite you in the butt if you don't take care of it the right way. But it is possible to treat it from home if you really know what you're doing, and Usnea would be one of those top choices for that purpose. Lastly, Usnea has antifungal properties and can be used topically as an antifungal against things like tinea versicolor, athlete's foot, or ringworm, which of course is not caused by a worm, but is a type of fungal infection. And it's going to work a lot better, of course, if you mix it with other antifungals, particularly black walnut, which is, of course, like the go-to herbal antifungal. And it can also be used internally for fungal infections, such as chronic sinus infections, which often have a fungal component to them. And so the way you would do that is you would make a formula as a nasal spray, an herbal nasal spray, and adding in Usnea for those chronic sinus infections that just keep coming back and recurring. It probably needs to get some type of antifungal in there as well, and it may be able to have good results clearing that up. So those are some of the main uses of Usnea. Next, I'm going to be harvesting some, and I'm going to show you how to make a special herbal preparation that I've never showed on this channel before. It's called a dual extract, and actually we'll be making a multifractional extract, but I'll explain that in a moment. But what a dual extract is, it's a type of herbal preparation where we're trying to extract different constituents in different solvents. So let me explain that. So for Usnea, it has both antimicrobial properties and immune system stimulating or modulating properties. And the one of the primary constituents responsible for its antimicrobial properties is called usnic acid. And usnic acid extracts a lot better in alcohol. So we want to make an alcohol extract with our Usnea. But then we also want to extract those immune system modulating polysaccharides. And those polysaccharides are going to extract a lot better in water. So we want to make a water extract as well. So that's why it's called a dual extract. We want to extract both of those sets of constituents, and then we're going to combine them. And then we're actually going to make a multifractional extract, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go ahead and jump into the kitchen, and I'll show you how to make a really good preparation for Usnea. All right, so we're going to begin by making a tincture, which is an alcohol extract. And we're going to start by grinding up our Usnea in a coffee grinder into a fine powder. Now, if you notice that your local species is too fibrous and it gets wrapped up in the blades of the grinder, you can just cut it up as finely as you can. And so for this tincture, we're going to be using 95% or 190 proof Everclear. So this is just like the strongest alcohol you can buy in the liquor store. I'm out of Everclear, so I'm going to be using this organic 190 proof ethyl alcohol made from sugarcane, which is pretty much the same thing. It's just a different type of alcohol. And so the reason we're using such high proof alcohol, first of all, is to extract those alcohol soluble constituents, but we also want it to be really strong because remember, we're going to be mixing it 50-50 with water, and we want our final product to be at least about 25% alcohol just to make sure that it's going to be shelf stable at room temperature for long periods of time. So I'm going to go ahead and start tearing this up and grind it into a powder. All right, now that I've ground up the Usnea here, I'm going to go ahead and pour in the alcohol, and I'm going to be doing about a 1-to-2 ratio by volume. So for 1 part Usnea, I'm going to double it with the amount of alcohol that I put in. So go ahead and pour it in. And remember, this is food grade alcohol. This is not isopropyl alcohol, which is very toxic to consume. So just keep that in mind. So here we go. I'm gonna roughly double it. I might not even completely double it because I do want it to be really strong, but you can see that's almost doubled there. Now for most tinctures at this point, we would just go ahead and cap it off, and then we'd let this sit on the counter for 4 to 6 weeks to extract. Then we would strain it and it would be finished. And that's perfectly fine if you want to do that for Usnea. But for Usnea specifically, over the years, herbalists have figured out that if you make a hot alcohol extract, it extracts those constituents out of this lichen all the better. So we're going to make a hot alcohol extract for this video, and there's a few different ways you could do that. One of the ways you could do that is by just taking this and putting it on a heating pad for a few weeks. That's going to give us desirable results. Another thing you could do is take this tincture and put it up in a hot attic over the summer, and then at the end of the summer take it out, and that would give us desirable results as well. You could also put this in a paper bag to block out the sunlight and put it up on a windowsill in direct sunlight, and let it sit there all summer, right? But we're going to do a method that's a lot quicker, and the method I'm going to show you is only going to take 2 or 3 days. Really 3 would probably be the best, but I'll just do 2 for the sake of this video. We're going to be putting it in a crock pot on low heat. Okay, so I'm going to be putting it in here for about 48 hours. So I'll go ahead and show you what that would look like. I'm just going to place it in just like that, and there's already water there in the bottom, and it's just on low heat. Now, there is some danger, obviously, when you're adding heat and alcohol and potentially some pressure buildup. So what I'm going to do for this is, as the water starts to evaporate and get low, I don't want to pour cold water into this because, that cold and hot could make the glass crack. So that wouldn't be good. So once the water starts to get low, I'll take this out, and I may do this a couple times a day. And then I'll pour hot water back into here to refill it. And while I'm doing that, I'll also just open the cap, let any pressure release that's built up, and then I'll just put it right back in. And for me, I have not found this to be a problem at all. Usually, even when I release the pressure, because I do it like 2 or 3 times a day, there's not even a whole lot of pressure built up anyway. So in my mind, there's no danger as long as you obviously recognize that you're using heat and alcohol, and there's obviously a flammability concern and all that. But that's what I'm going to be doing. So this is going to be sitting in here for 48 hours. And while this sits, I'm going to show you some tips for the next part of the process. And then once it's done, we'll continue with our preparation. Okay, so next I want to talk about an issue that we're going to run into in the next part of the medicine making process. After our alcohol extract is finished, we're going to take the Usnea out of it and then boil it in water to extract the polysaccharides. Then we're going to mix the two like I talked about. But when we do that, the polysaccharides won't want to mix with the alcohol, and it's going to cause something called precipitation. So to show you what I mean, I'm going to show you mixing this here, which is just Usnea decoction, or basically Usnea tea, and I'm going to mix this with alcohol, and you're going to see there's going to be like a curdling effect where the polysaccharides are sort of trying to bind with the alcohol, and they don't want to bind, so they end up all just clumping together. So let me go ahead and show you that really quick. Okay, so I'll get a nice close-up shot here, and I'm going to pour in the Usnea decoction. Now you could see there was a little bit of sediment in there from the Usnea, but for the most part, there's nothing floating around, a couple bubbles, not a lot of solids or anything like that floating around. You can see I'm kind of stirring it. A couple little specks of Usnea in there, but no solid material. Now watch what happens when I pour in the alcohol. I'm going to pour it in, but I'm also going to be stirring it just to try to actually reduce the amount of precipitation we get. I'm going to pour in half of it, stir, and then I'm going to pour in the other half. Okay, I went ahead and stirred it up pretty good. Now let's go ahead and wait a second and see what happens. Okay, now it's been about not even 2 minutes yet, and I went ahead and actually gave it another thorough stir just to really try to mix it in. But as you can see now, where before it was clear, now you can see that there's this solid material. Actually, it's all clumping together. And so it has this curdling effect, and you can see that this is what it looks like. These are all of those polysaccharides, okay? and they do not want to mix at all into the solution. No matter how much I stir, no matter how vigorously, they all turn into this little clump. And we absolutely do not want this because, well, first of all these polysaccharides, now that they're all in this clump, they can't mix into our, you know, they're just going to like sink to the bottom, and they're not going to be in the preparation except all clumped together at the bottom. And so we don't want that. Now that's best case scenario. Worst case scenario is, you know, sometimes for different types of herbs, this might float on the surface. You can see like little chunks like this right here might float on the surface. And what's going to end up happening is it could basically leave a place open for mold to grow. So if you have stuff floating on the surface, then you can have mold grow in an otherwise shelf-stable preparation. So this is going to be shelf-stable at room temperature for a very long time because we have so much alcohol in it. But if we have little chunks floating on the surface, then it may not be shelf-stable. So I'm going to show you what we're going to do about this precipitation and how we can avoid this in our final preparation. All right, so here we have something called vegetable glycerin, and it's going to help us stabilize that precipitation and help prevent the clumping action of the polysaccharides that we just saw. So for those of you who don't know what glycerin is, it's often used in herbal medicine making as an alternative to alcohol. So if you've ever bought a tincture, especially ones made for kids, and you notice that it has like a gooey texture and a really sweet taste, that's vegetable glycerin. So this is 100% pure vegetable glycerin, and it says right here food grade, so we can use this for medicine making. And so what I have over here, this is the same thing, an Usnea decoction, or basically an Usnea tea, but instead of using just water, I did 50% water and 50% glycerin and then boiled it in that mixture. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to pour this in here. All right, so again, we have the same amounts that we used last time. You can see it's a lot thicker there. And then I'm going to pour in the alcohol, and you can see the reason I was whisking it, because we do still want to pour this in slowly. We don't want to pour it all in at one time really fast. I'm going to pour about half in. I'm going to whisk it vigorously. I'm going to give it a second, and then I'm going to pour the other half in. So this is alcohol. All right, I've went ahead and waited a couple minutes, and as you can see, there is absolutely no precipitation in here. The glycerin has effectively stabilized the precipitation and reduced the clumping altogether. And so all those polysaccharides now, instead of clumping together, are evenly distributed throughout the mixture. So we're going to make sure we're going to be getting them every single dose we take. We're not going to have any floating on the bottom, and there's no ribbons of precipitate floating on the top that could potentially lead to mold. So let me go ahead and show you the two side by side. All right, there you go. Look at that difference. You can see there that big chunk of precipitation just floating in there, and that's all those wonderful immune system stimulating polysaccharides that would just be wasted. And you can also see that the glycerin itself acts as a solvent. So not only did it stabilize the precipitation, it also probably extracted more constituents out of the Usnea than if we were to boil it with water alone. You can see that color difference too. So we probably have a stronger preparation with the glycerin anyway, but that is a multi-fractional extract. So it's not a dual extract because dual would just be water and alcohol, but when we add in that glycerin, now we have multiple different solvents that all make up a fraction of the total product, hence the name multi-fractional. So now you know this. Well, and also I do have to mention one more thing. If we would have poured this alcohol in and not stirred it at all, then it would still precipitate. And once it's in this little form right here, even if you have glycerin in there, it's hard, like this won't break up, because once it clumps, it's difficult to separate those clumps. And so the main thing is here is that whenever we make our final product, we want to pour in just a little bit at a time, stir it vigorously, pour it, stir, and we want to make sure that we just keep stirring and stirring, and that way the glycerin can do its job. So we don't want to just like dump it in there, or we're going to have the same product even if we added glycerin. So with that, I'll go ahead and show you how we actually apply this to our final Usnea preparation. All right, it's been 2 days. So our tincture's finished, and you can see this nice dark color. So I'm going to go ahead and strain it out, and I'll show you what we're going to do next. All right, so here we have our finished alcohol tincture, and we've saved our spent Usnea so that we can extract the rest of the constituents using water and glycerin. And so in this jar, I have about half as much water as there is alcohol in here. So the finished product is going to be 50% alcohol, 25% water, and 25% glycerin. I filled it to about the halfway point with water. Now I'll go ahead and fill it up with glycerin to where they are about even. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pour this into a pot. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the spent Usnea as well. Okay, so here's what it looks like with the Usnea added. And this is about what we want in the final product after boiling it for about 15 minutes. But obviously, as we boil it, some of that water is going to evaporate. So what we want to do is we want to stick something in there, in this case a butter knife, and we're going to measure the water level. And you can see that little line of bubbles. And so we want to remember about how much is in there currently. And then we're going to go ahead and add some water to account for some of it absorbing into the Usnea and some of it evaporating. Just a little bit, not a whole lot. Just whatever you think is going to boil off in about 15 minutes. And then we'll just remember where that little mark was on our butter knife. Let's see if you can get it in focus here. There you go. And it's about right where my thumb is. And so once the water gets back to that level after boiling, then we'll take it off and we'll go ahead and strain it. So let's go ahead and do that. And it's really important in this step to give it a good squeeze as much as you can, because those polysaccharides are like kind of slimy and they're going to want to stay in there. And so if you like squeeze it super hard, then you'll get a lot more. In that very last squeeze, they'll all come out. And by the way, if you're wondering what this is called a nut milk bag. It's for making almond milk, and it's basically like a reusable cheesecloth. I use it in a lot of my herbal preparations. And wow, look at that. We got almost the exact same amount, 50-50. So now we're going to very carefully mix these together. And I'm a little bit paranoid at this step because I've done this whole process just to have it all precipitate out by pouring it in too fast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour in the decoction first that has all the polysaccharides in it. And then I'm going to be stirring it really vigorously and pouring in just a little bit of alcohol at a time, letting it all mix up really good, and then pouring it a little bit more. And I'll probably, you know, have like 4 separate pours just to make sure no precipitation happens. All right, so after stirring this up for almost a ridiculous amount of time, because like I said, I am kind of paranoid of the precipitation happening and wasting it all, you can see that there is no precipitation in here. All of this here is just bubbles floating on the top. So you can see they're not like solid chunks or anything like that. And if you stir it around, if there was any precipitation, you'd be able to see solid chunks kind of popping up. But this is all just like little bubbles and stuff like that. So mission successful, and now I'll go ahead and bottle this up into the jar. All right, here we have the finished product, and if you were going to take this all by itself, you could take anywhere from about a half teaspoon to 1 full teaspoon, maybe about 3 times a day. You could start by experimenting with about that dose. But in the next scene, I'm going to talk about some of the potential safety concerns with Usnea and why I actually recommend that you dilute it in a formula with other herbs rather than take it all by itself, although you absolutely can take it all by itself. Many people do. So let's go ahead and look at that next. All right, guys, before we wrap this video up, let's go ahead and talk about some of the potential safety concerns when it comes to using Usnea. So first things first, Usnea is not an herb that's recommended during pregnancy. So if you are pregnant, it's a good idea to go ahead and pass on Usnea for the time being. The next thing I wanted to mention is that some people can develop a rash or get like a burning sensation when they use Usnea, especially if they're using a stronger preparation like I showed you how to make in this video, and if they're taking it straight. So for those people who do have a negative reaction to it, it's usually not going to be an issue if it's used in a formula with other herbs, so it's sort of diluted in that formula. Then it's not really going to be an issue for almost anybody at all. So for those few people who do have an issue with it, keep that in mind. You might want to just try to dilute it and see if that works better for you. And on the topic of diluting it, it's probably a good idea to use this in a formula anyway, rather than all by itself, because there have been some potential toxicity concerns that have arisen over the past couple decades. Now, I want to make it very clear that most herbalists consider Usnea very safe, and there has never been any toxicity reports to my knowledge after using Usnea as a whole herb, like I showed in this video. That being said, over the past couple decades, there was a weight loss supplement, or maybe a couple different weight loss supplements that contained usnic acid, which, as we looked at, is one of the active constituents in Usnea, and they developed liver problems, and a couple people, or at least a handful of people, even had to have liver transplants after taking it. And so this has led some herbalists to suggest that you shouldn't take Usnea internally at all, but most herbalists don't really think that way. Most herbalists will not mention it at all, or they will say that you should only take it for 3 or 4 weeks at a time before giving your body a break. And so what I would recommend is that you don't take Usnea for more than 3 or 4 weeks at a time internally, and that you dilute it with other herbs in a formula. So for example, for a respiratory infection, we may use Usnea and sweet gum and horse mint and echinacea all together instead of just taking Usnea all by itself. So that's what's recommended. That's it for this video. So I hope you guys have enjoyed it. And if you want to learn more about medicinal plants of the southeastern US, again, make sure to download my free guide to medicinal plants in the link in the description below. And if you want to learn about another herb that's really good for treating upper respiratory tract infections, check out my video on sweet gum, which you can see popping up somewhere on the screen. Again, my name is Matthew Hunter with Legacy Wilderness Academy. Y'all have a great day.